In this video, I want to talk about timers. Timers are modules in the Atmega 328 which enable us to time different events. And the basic concept of timing is the same as we had discussed in the previous few videos. You can change time by having a square wave and counting the number of clocks that pass by. Okay, so a timer in essence is basically a counter. Okay, so you have a counter here. The input of the counter is a clock signal or a square wave. In microcontrollers we call this square wave, which is used for timing a clock signal. And as an output of the counter, you just get a count, right? So you get a digital count. So that I'm just drawing it like this. So you get a count. So it tells you how many square cycles have gone by. So it tells you the number n. If you remember, we had talked about n in the previous videos. And of course, we know the t, the time period of our square wave, and therefore we know how much time has passed, which is going to be n times t. Okay, so so the counter in different timers. So Atmega 328 has three timers. It's got timer 1, it's got timer 0, and timer 2. So timer 0 and timer 2 are 8-bit counters, and timer 1 is a 16-bit counter. What does that mean? That means that this number, is a 8-bit number in timer 0 and timer 2, while it's a 16-bit number in timer 1. Which means that this count can go from 0 to 2 to the power 16 in 2 to the power 16 minus 1 in timer 1, while it can go from 0 to 2 to the power 8 minus 1 in timer 0 and timer 2, right? So in timer 0 and timer 2, you can have counts from 0 all the way to 255. So you have 256 levels that you can count, and then the timer overflows, which means that the count again starts from 0 and goes all over again. So the maximum time that you can count in timer 0 and timer 2 is 256 times the time period of your square wave. Does that make sense? Okay. Similarly, in timer 1, what you can count is the maximum time that you can count is 6536 times t. This is 2 to the power 16. So that many levels you have. Uh, Another thing that timer 1, all timers have, is a way of changing this time t, right? So the system clock, as we said, is 16 megahertz. So this is 16 megahertz in general, so in the system. But what timers have are small things inbuilt into them called prescalers. Prescalers are modules that take a clock, take a square wave, and give as an output a clock of a lower frequency. Let's say the frequency of the clock changes by n. So if the frequency here was f, here the frequency becomes f over n, which means that this time here increases. Okay, so if you have a prescaler which changes the frequency by 2, or it divides the frequency by 2, so we call it a prescaler of 2, and the frequency that you get here would be f by 2, or the time would increase by twice. And that is one way in which you can change the time. So can you see there are two things that are going on simultaneously which we can use to count times in our timers. One is this n, and this n is basically given by this count of our counter, and we can read it off a counter. We'll look at how we can do that. And then we will be able to change the T by looking at or changing the settings of our prescalers. In the next video, we'll look at timer 1 specifically and see how we can actually program these changes.